So before we begin, I was asked to have people around the table introduce themselves for the benefit of the people who may be watching this video. So my name is Selinda Barkhuis. I'm the County Treasurer. I'm the Chair of the Finance Committee.
Kay Stevens, Senior Accountant in the Treasurer's Office.
Barkhuis, Commissioner.
Bill Peach, Commissioner.
Debbie Cook, Budget Director.
Jim Jones, County Administrator.
Bob Martin, County Public Works. Stan Creasy, Auditor's Chief Accountant.
Sugar Riggs, County Auditor.
Mike Chapman, Chair of the Board.
And before we move on, I also want to point out the voting members of the Finance Committee are me as the Chair and County Treasurer, Sugar Riggs as the County Auditor, and then Mike Chapman as the Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. The three of us are the voting members of the Finance Committee, to the extent that comes out today. So the first item then will be the approval of the agenda. That would help if I pass it out. Also, passing that out, I'll pass out the revenue month. We usually, it's available online, but we usually do pass it out to the Finance Committee. And the Treasurer's CD ladder that's also passed out.
So, Madam Chair, I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second, any discussion? We're going to vote. The agenda is approved. So the first item then on the agenda, does everybody have agenda? Is the Finance Committee Authority, and I will hand this out now. I have 3 copies that have additional information because it was quite extensive. It's available online. It is the Knowing the Territory, which is basically the guidelines for Washington City, County, and Special Purpose District officials, and the commissioners are going to get a copy of each of that. And the documents in I'm hoping I have enough copies of this one.
I can make some more if you want. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, I have to actually say it. Everybody have one then. I think everybody around the table has one then. And this is the first item, the Finance Committee Authority. And the first page behind it is a compilation of all of these sections in state statute and in county policy that talk about the Finance Committee. And the reason I did this because it's very consistent and it sets out our authority and limits for our authority, I suppose, as the Finance Committee. And that is how we're here today. We're here as the Finance Committee. We're not here as the individual treasurer, the individual auditor, or the board. We're here as the Finance Committee. And as a Finance Committee, what it says about that in the statute, and I'm going to read this, the county treasurer, the county auditor, the chair of the county legislative authority, ex officio, shall constitute the county finance committee. The county treasurer shall act as chair of the committee and the county auditor as secretary thereof. The committee shall keep a full and complete record of all its proceedings and appropriate books of record, and all such records and all correspondence relating to the committee shall be kept in the office of the county auditor and shall be open to public inspection. The committee shall approve county investment policy and the debt policy and shall make appropriate rules and regulations for the carrying out of the provisions of RCW 3648.010 through 3648.060, not inconsistent with law. And those sections, well, they have to do with designated depositories, which is not at all on the agenda today. And then in the finance policies, basically it repeats that. And it, for instance, on the County Policy 515, Investment Policy, Section 142, Finance Committee, This committee was formed for the purpose of monitoring investments made by the treasurer. The post of the county treasurer, county auditor, and the chair of the board of county commissioners is frequently attended by other interested parties, although I don't think in the 5 years I've been here we've had this many interested parties. It has the formal duties of adoption of policy and advisement. The Clallam County Finance Committee has been in existence for over 50 years. A formal investment policy was adopted by the Finance Committee in 1985, and then it says this, the County Policy 515 in effect. And County Policy 500, General Finance Policies, Section 5.12, County's Budget Procedures. The county's budget procedures shall comply with RCW Chapter 3640. Procedures outlined in County Commission resolutions are followed in establishing the budgetary data reflected in the financial statements. Specifics of the county's budget procedures are listed below. The one that mentions the Finance Committee. In early July, the Finance Committee meets and reviews revenues for the first half of the year, trends and preliminary estimates for the coming budget year. The Board of Commissioners made by a resolution approved budget principles that modify these financial policies for the coming year only. And then in section 6.1, annual revenues of County Policy 500. Annual revenues are conservatively estimated as the basis for preparation of the annual budget and county service programs. Major revenues will be estimated by the county treasurer and reviewed by the county's finance committee prior to adoption of the annual budget. All revenue forecasts will be performed utilizing accepted analytical techniques. And then again, there's a section entitled Finance Committee in County Policy 500, that's subsection 8.2. The county will maintain a finance committee whose membership includes, at a minimum, the chair of the Board of Commissioners, the county auditor, and the county treasurer, who shall act as chair. The finance committee will meet at least quarterly and will discuss investments, anticipated and actual revenues, financial trends, and the state of the various county funds. The Finance Committee shall adopt and maintain a sound investment policy as required by the revised codes of Washington. The Finance Committee shall formulate plans to address revenue shortfalls, both short and long term. The Finance Committee will review the county's financial policies at least biannually and make recommendations for changes to the Board of Commissioners. The committee may, at its discretion, discuss other issues related to financial matters, increase its membership, and formulate financial policies for recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. So what we were asked to do early this year is to review and vet certain proposed projects. And the reason I went through this is because as to the proposed Opportunity Fund grant and the proposed Carlsberg Sewer project, the way I read these provisions is that the Finance Committee authority is limited to simply offering advice. And so I don't anticipate bringing to some sort of a vote that either that this project should go forward or not. I think whatever is said here today should be considered to be advice to the Board of County Commissioners, and as such, advice can be taken or ignored. Now, what I attached to this sheet, this is simply my advice, Treasurer's advice to the Board of Clallam County Commissioners regarding the Finance Committee authority. So having said that, and I think our authority here and our board here is limited to offering advice, so my advice about these projects is, as we discussed them, is that from my perspective there are two aspects to the commissioners making a decision. Ultimately what it comes down to is it's up to the commissioners to decide whether to move these projects forward, how to move these projects forward. And anything we say here is advice. So having said that, my advice is, from my perspective, that I see two aspects to the commissioner's funding decision-making process. First question would be, can the commissioners make these projects or fund these projects, and whether the commissioners should fund these these projects, and those are the two questions I think the commissioners should consider asking as they make these decisions. And from my perspective, whether the county commissioners should fund certain projects is entirely within their discretion-making decision, to be exercised only when the commissioners have determined that they can fund such projects. And whether the commissioners can fund either of these projects raises issues of responsibility and accountability. And the next quote comes from a memorandum that is on the intranet, maintained by the budget director, and it says, the primary responsibility for monitoring of budgets to ensure compliance with county policies rests with the county official. Policy and rules of accountability require departments to monitor their budgets, revenues, and expenditures closely. Now, last year, I exercised my check and balance executive authority in a due diligence attempt to draw the Commissioner's attention to certain recommendations and actions by staff under the Commissioner's responsibility and accountability involving proposed expenditures for budgets, also under the County Commissioner's responsibility and accountability. And at this point today, the only thing I have to say to that is, to the extent that the Commissioners now share those concerns, I advise the Commissioners to resolve them, because ultimately only they can. And so what I have attached is, well, as we just discussed, the compilation of these Finance Committee authority provisions. And for the Commissioners, the document, Knowing the Territory, Basic Legal Guidelines for Washington City, County, and Special Purpose Districts, which was prepared by the Municipal Research Services Corporation, and was just issued in August of 2015. And then the other handouts, which I won't go through, but my recommendation to the Commissioners, my advice to the Commissioners is to review all this at their leisure as they move forward. And one of the documents is entitled Powers, Responsibilities, and Accountability, and it is a summary of where basically my concerns of last year is what led me to use my executive authority. This sort of sums it up. It's a very short compilation of everything that happened last year. And then the other document is a compilation of public process and notice requirements for budget actions, the way they are set out in state statute, RCW 36.40, and then the county policy provisions. And with that, that's all I have to say about the Finance Committee authority and my advice, and I would like to hand it over to anybody around the table if they have anything to add to this agenda item section.
No, you've done a very thorough job explaining that, and I think for the first time in the county's history, it's documented and put on the record as to the role of the Finance Authority, and I appreciate that, and I think it's a service well rendered, that the public now understands the role of this board, and we'll stay within those lanes going forward, and I appreciate that.
You did a good job.
Anybody else have any questions about that, Commissioners?
Not at the moment.
And I'd be happy at any point, frankly, if after you've had an opportunity to review these documents, to come to any work session and go through them in detail and explain what's in there, answer any questions. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
So if there are no more questions on the agenda item, Finance Committee authority, then we can go through to the next item, and I entitled that the state of the various county funds, because that was how it is described in these, because that is one of the things in the county policies that as a Finance Committee we can certainly discuss the state of various county funds. And I think that is the perspective from which we're going to discuss these proposed expenditures that you were asked to review. And I do want to note that I didn't receive anything, no documentation, at all on the SARC proposal, so I haven't seen anything. But I did receive some correspondence. I think both the auditor, it was addressed to both the auditor and the treasurer, from Jan Richardson, who is a member on the board of SARC, I believe. In any event, so I want to pass this out. So it is the county commissioner's proposal, the SARC, that we funded. So does the county commissioner's office have any information on the
I
SARC?
think our budget director had some documents prepared.
It's not much detail, it's just
The
an
state of the
explanation
budget.
of where the budget is and how it's been planned.
So I will hand out then, well, you hand out, I will hand out what I have here.
My handout is just a few documents. The first 2 pages are the adopted budget, in case anybody needs to refer to that this morning. The next page is the Opportunity Fund budget work papers. And I highlighted the revenue section in the Opportunity Fund where the Barkhuis sewer loan comes into the fund, and then down below where the expenditures are, where the transfer goes out to Carlsberg Sewer. I also just underlined the undesignated projects line. In case the commissioners decide to fund the SARC project, that's where those funds would come from. And then is the Carlsberg Sewer budget, 2 pages there. And again, I just highlighted where the revenue comes into that fund from the Opportunity Fund. And then below, in the next page, are all the expenditures that go with that. And then the very last page is the Opportunity Fund spreadsheet, which was updated March 15th. And the only thing I wanted to point out with that is that when we built the budget for the Opportunity Fund, we were estimating that the beginning fund balance would be $1.3 million, when in actuality you can see on the spreadsheet that we had a beginning balance of $1.5 million, so that's 220 more than we had estimated. But so just that's all.
And maybe Jim, you can explain the idea of the undesignated projects.
Sure.
And
Sure.
what the board's intent was when the budget was passed last year, and that was put in the budget as a line item.
Because of the concern last year over, what constitutes being in the budget and what doesn't, and we got clear direction from the prosecutor's office, confirmed by the state auditor's office, that the budget, as designated, as described, both in policy and in RCW, is the adopted budget, which is just the first 2 pages, the resolution adopting it in 1 page. A lot of the questions that were brought up last year are, as Selinda so well pointed out, are just expressions of concern. They're not real issues of whether it was legal or not, because the budget clearly has the amount of money available. One of the things that we discussed at length last year and during the budget process was how do we, in the Opportunity Fund, which is a fund that the official budget shows all the money coming in and all the money going out in total. It really doesn't designate what anything is for, just in and out money. That's that is the official approved adopted budget. But in the work papers, we take an effort, and in the auditor's work, we try and designate in much more detail any time money is actually spent, so that we have, rather than just in a big lump, we actually very specifically say how the money did actually get spent, right to the penny. And so the work papers in the budget try and approximate that. And in the Opportunity Fund, one of the questions was, okay, just the way it works is that people come along, or other governments actually, public entities come along and they make requests out of the Opportunity Fund for generally things that come up during the year. And in fact, I did research all the way back to 1998 when we opened the Opportunity Fund and presented it to the commissioners on what of the total amount of projects that were funded over the life of the fund, how many of them were previously specifically designated in the budget, and how many of them just came along as part of this undesignated money. And there were 27 total projects, and of the 27, only 4 were actually specifically designated. The other 23 each year were done in a large lump undesignated project category, and then adopted by the commissioners as approved by the, recommended by the Opportunity Fund Advisory Board or not. So in this budget, when we built this one this year, and as you see on the Opportunity Fund budget worksheet page that Debbie has provided, we talked about it. We knew SARC was coming along, or had initially last year, initially made a request, but then they withdrew it before the budget was actually adopted. So we made the decision specifically not to put it in as a specific SARC issue, but instead to just place $1 million of the what we anticipated to be $1,328,000 of beginning fund balance. We said we would put $1 million as undesignated project for anything that came along and that was then approved and recommended by the Opportunity Fund Advisory Board, not wanting to prejudge their effort, feeling that if we put it in the budget before they'd even had a hearing on recommending it, that would be getting the cart before the horse. So that was the rationale for building the budget this time, even with all of the budget work papers, even with all the transparency issues. So we do have $1 million for undesignated projects. We did designate specifically the $160,000 for the Economic Development Council. The board did vote to approve that, subject to a decision after the first of the year of whether to do it or not, but to put it in the budget. So we knew that was coming along. We have specifically identified the debt service principal and interest that we have to make every year for, I believe, 8 more years on the Clallam Business Incubator work that we did. And of course we had we did reflect both the money coming in and money going out for what we anticipated to be the entirety of the Carlsberg Sewer Project. On the SARC issue, it was anticipated that we would have $1 million for any projects that came along, and after the first of the year, we did get the SARC request for the $750,000.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to weigh in at this point? Well, I just want to respond to, I still hold those concerns. I still have serious concerns about whether the whole process last year was illegal or not. But I let go of those concerns because ultimately I was unwilling to be personally sued over them. I'm personally not willing to accept personal servers by a sheriff's deputy and then personally defend the Constitution of Washington State and all of its revised codes and the county charter and county policy. That's why I let those warrants go, because it was doing a number on my health, and ultimately I don't believe it is my personal responsibility to defend all of those laws. But I still hold very serious concerns. But my point here today is that ultimately these concerns involve staff that is under the Commissioner's direct responsibility and accountability to supervise. It involves funds under the Commissioner's direct responsibility and accountability to manage, and it involves expenditures from those funds that are the Commissioner's direct responsibility and accountability to decide on. So I still have those concerns. I'm just not willing to go there again, and I will state that clearly. I'm not going to be granting any warrants because ultimately I think responsibility and accountability is entirely within the Commissioner's office. I'm not willing to put myself in the middle again. So with that said, my advice to the Commissioners is that for the commissioners to direct the county administrator and to secure attorney general opinions when in doubt to ensure that the funds have been appropriated consistent with Chapter 36.40 RCW. That these projects, or this project, or other projects that may come along, qualify for funding under the RCW 82.14.370 and Chapter 5.40 in the County Code and County Administrative Policy 530, and that the resulting contracts meet the requirements of Title 39 RCW Public Works. My opinion, all of these I's and all of these T's have to be dotted and crossed. That's just my opinion, that's just my advice. And what I have attached to that advice is the correspondence that the auditor and treasurer received in advance of this meeting from Jan Richardson. And I've also attached an application that San Juan Island uses, and it, especially page 2 asks some questions which I think would be questions that I believe would be helpful in the commissioners deciding whether these projects qualify. And then also I attached 2 Attorney General opinions on this specific statute, authorized uses of local option sales taxes. And for 2 reasons I attached them. One of them is I think it might be helpful for the commissioners to understand what the law requires with these projects, but also just to point out that this is what the Attorney General does. If you have a question, if you have concerns, and this is what I attempted, I specifically asked the prosecutor on 3 separate occasions last year, please submit our dispute to the Attorney General. And he refused. I don't have that authority to reach out to the Attorney General. The prosecutor did not want to take my direction on it. Perhaps as the commissioners, if you have concerns, you have more clout to direct the administrator, to direct the prosecutor to submit questions to the Attorney General. But in any event, these are just 2 examples of the sort of questions you can ask, the sort of answers might come back. That is the whole point of asking Attorney General opinions. So that is my advice as for these opportunity funds, to the extent, that ultimately this is, the ball in these is entirely in your court. Is there any other discussion, input on the issue? And beyond that, as a finance committee, we did not receive any information about this particular project, so it seems sort of difficult to actually go into any details as to vet it in any way, shape, or form. Is there anything else on this project? If not, agenda item, then we would go forward to the Carlsbrook Sewer Public Works. And again, I did not receive any information in preparation of this meeting.
You're about to.
Sorry?
I have a hand up.
Excellent. Then we will turn it over to Mark.
Madam Chair, before we move forward on this, did you have any concerns you wanted to raise with regards to SARC or anything that you would like the board to know?
No, I agree with Selinda. I haven't really received anything else as part of the Finance Committee about SARC at all. I think she does have some good suggestions in here that it's obviously going to take some time to read over and look over and analyze them.
Do you, either one of you, have anything else you want to weigh in with the board before we'll be discussing the issue next week, so if you want to come to the work session next week if something comes up, so I just wanted to... Your opportunity to comment and advise the board will continue on like any legislative matter. The board takes input from the public and staff all the way up until the point where the board makes a legislative decision. Just leave that out there. Okay, thanks. Sorry, Bob.
No. I wasn't sure how this meeting was organized, so I have 4 sheets that I'm handing out. I stapled them together for the committee members. Yeah. And then I have a few extra. I hope I have enough to go around for everybody else. And I'll pass them out as I talk about them. To be uncharacteristically brief, fortunately for you all, I'm kind of suffering from pollen effects right now, so my voice could give out. Be a blessing, I assure you. The first sheet is a summary of the Carlsbad sewer account up until present, from when it was formed in 2010. You can see the revenue sources that set up that account. There have been some transfers in and out, mostly out, as the project proceeded through the years. Probably the significant thing is that we've received loan proceeds of a little over $500,000 to this point. We've not had the need to request very much out of the loan so far. There is another pending request that we've made for roughly $900,000. But as it stands right now, the expenditures out of the fund are shown up till, I guess, March 16th of approximately $3 million, a little over $3 million, leaving an actual fund balance at this point of $1,674,000. Any questions on this sheet? Okay, second sheet. The first sheet was an attempt to look backwards, you know, where did the fund come from, what have we used in it so far. And this sheet is an attempt to look forward and determine what the remaining project costs are going to be, what the available funding is going to be, and where we stand at this point. So I've spent a little bit of time going through this. First of all, the construction costs. As you know, there have been a lot of estimates of construction costs over the years. They've all been in the somewhere in the $10 to $12 million range. We opened bids on March the 1st, and we found a good bid response. We had 7 bidders. They were all providing a bid cost of less than what we had estimated, or what the engineer had estimated. The low bid, which has not been awarded yet, of course, was from a firm called Pacific Civil and Infrastructure out of Federal Way, of $8,103,975. Sales tax, it says 8.2 here, but I did calculate it at 8.4, realizing that that's going to be the rate that they'll end up paying. So that figure of $680,000 is calculated at 8.4, I hope. You know, it is. Construction management, we'll need to put some effort into reviewing, inspecting, and documenting construction activities. We have a proposed amendment with Gray and Osborne to do most of that work. That has not been acted on yet either by the board. And that amount is $701,690. We anticipate hiring an inspector. I'm not sure, have we had him already? Is he officially on?
We have to check. We're on the cusp of.
We're in the process of hiring somebody that will be the county's inspector, who will work with the Gray and Osborne construction management team. I've estimated the cost of that person plus a vehicle. There's a small pending balance and a bill from Gray and Osborne that I factored in. And then there's the need for additional staff work throughout the project, the remaining life of the project. That will be to do such things as work on ordinances necessary to set up a utility, to, sort of oversee any claims or any change orders that arise during the project, do some supplementary inspection. I kind of summarized who we think are likely to be involved and approximately what their hours are at the bottom. And I freely admit these are estimates, and the reality of it is when we get into it, they could be shown to be either less or more. So the total of what we think we are going to need to spend on this project going forward is $9,654,000. The other question is what funding is available. I've already discussed the remaining balance in the sewer fund, $1,674,000. The remaining balance in the Public Works Trust Fund loan is $9,457,000. So we have a total available right now of $11,133,000. 131, you're right. So let's change.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Didn't you say that there's, so that does not reflect the pending reimbursement number 3 of $1 million, so how does that then fit into this? I mean, there's $1 million that actually should be deducted from that 9.4 million. So that should be 8.4 million, and then that adds up to something different.
Well, two things on that. I've shown it because it's a pending, and we haven't received it yet. We will, I think, fairly shortly. The Public Works Trust Fund has been good at returning pay requests pretty promptly. Usually I get them in 10 days or 2 weeks, somewhere in that vicinity. When we get that payment, it'll go back into the Opportunity Fund and then be transferred, hopefully, back into the Sewer Fund. So the effect of that $928,000 pending reimbursement request is that it will increase the Sewer Fund by that amount and decrease the Public Works Trust Fund loan by that amount, so the total available funding remains the same, $11,131,000. Have I been obtuse in that explanation, or is it?
So basically, we've already borrowed $1.5 million from the loan.
Yeah, assuming the pending reimbursement is paid, yes. So that's where we stand, and with the remaining project cost of $9,600,000, we show a balance between funds available versus the expenditures we anticipate of just slightly less than $1.5 million. That balance would remain in the sewer fund and be available as a contingency for any construction issues that might come up. Could be used to help set up the utility, establish initial fund balances. Could be used to fund any change orders that might occur in the project and so forth.
Is there a contingency line built into the construction bid? Or is that?
No.
So there is no contingency
No,
line?
we don't. No, we wouldn't do that with a construction bid. But, in doing a budget for a construction project, you do anticipate things will come up, change orders, claims and that sort of thing. So it's prudent to have a contingency. Usually our engineers recommended that we maintain about a 5% contingency on this project. We obviously have far more than that with the $1,477,000.
So what we look for, Bob, is confirmation over time that the 5% contingency is available through the fund or the loan balance. We're going to have our check and balance on this as we progress through the project to make sure there's enough money to handle the potential 5% contingency. The answer to the question is, what is the current balance for the sewer fund?
So, we'll start construction once this $900,000 clears. We'll start construction with roughly $2.5 million in the project fund, the sewer fund. It's important that we have, I think, a fairly healthy balance, because as we get into the project, as construction proceeds, we will get monthly pay requests from the contractor, and they could be $1.5 million or $1 million. The initial one maybe even could run as much as $2 million, because he's got, as they all do, they front-end loaded their bid with a mobilization charge. In this case, it's $700,000. So we need to maintain enough cash balance in the sewer fund to one, pay the pay requests that come from the contractor, and two, be able to survive the couple of weeks or 3 weeks of time that will elapse between when we pay out and when we get reimbursed out of the trust fund.
Just cash flow.
Right, it's just a cash flow issue, but my judgment is it's prudent to start that process with about $2.5 million. It looks like that's what it will be. Any other questions on this sheet?
One for Stan, I did a quick calc on that, $486,000. What's the physical process that we would use to earmark the money so that once you get down to that level, it kind of sets off a red flag, you can't spend, into that $486,000?
Representing a 5% contingency level. There are lots of ways we can do it. Mostly you just watch it. I mean, every month you look at it and you make sure. I imagine there will be at least half a dozen pairs of eyes watching something like this. I don't think it will be a problem. I don't think we really need to set something up formally in the way of reserving something on our balance sheet or anything like that. Because, we talked earlier about people's primary responsibility on budget is to monitor their own budget. And I expect that that'll happen this way also.
Absolutely.
I'm sure that Bob is going to be watching it. I know I will be. I imagine Jim will be watching it, and Debbie, and we'll have more eyes on that than probably really need.
In order for us to get down to that level of remaining funding, something major would have had to have occurred with construction, and something in the order of $1 million hit that we didn't anticipate. And you can bet you that something like that's going to get a lot of notice.
And in fact, the commissioners would be involved in a review of that change and fully alert to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Commissioner's the only one who can approve that kind of a change order. That's correct.
Okay, any other questions on this? Third sheet, there were some questions about operating costs going forward. In conjunction with developing this plan, which was adopted by the board in December of 2014, or they actually may have adopted it in January of 2015. In conjunction, anyway, with this report, we hired a separate consultant to do a financial plan. Excuse me. Not contagious. That financial plan is Chapter 7 of this report, and more detail is in the appendix, one of the appendices to the report. I think it's H. And then even further detail, if you want it, is available through a pretty elaborate spreadsheet that the consultant prepared, which details all of our anticipated expenses and costs of running the sewer system year by year through the next 40 years, I believe you went out. Obviously, you get out too far, and some of those numbers get a little shaky. What I've handed out, however, is the table that's in the financial plan. This shows what he thinks the initial startup operating costs are likely to be. And at the time, I think he anticipated starting up earlier than we're likely to. But to get a good annualized initial year full year of cost. If you look at the 2018 number, that's probably reasonably close. And so this gives a fairly detailed breakout of what we anticipate operating costs are likely to be. And then below that, what we think the charges that we'll have to pay to the city of Sequim are likely to be. So initially, the actual operating costs, paying for electricity, paying for the help, paying for all the things you need to pay for to operate a sewer system, we estimate to be $120,684, or the financial consultant estimated. I think he's reasonably right. A big portion of that is salaries, about a quarter FTE, we think. Another big portion of it is chemicals for anticipated odor control that might be necessary to operate the system. So those are kind of the big items. But this being a gravity collection system, it's not very, it doesn't take very much to operate it. There's not much to operate as long as the gravity keeps working the way it has been. So, you know, it's relatively easy to keep it going. The other part of our operating expenses, though, are what we have agreed to with the city of Sequim, and that is to pay them to treat the sewage, the actual cost that they themselves incur in treating sewage on a per gallon basis. That works out to somewhere close to a penny per gallon. I think it's a little less than that, maybe 0.92 cents per gallon. That gets adjusted year by year through actual costs incurred, and all of that adjustment process and all of those costs that we incur with the city of Sequim are fully outlined in the agreement that we signed with the city of Sequim a little over a year ago. That agreement is also in this facility plans, I think probably the final appendix in the facility plan, if anybody's interested in seeing that. So we think the initial cost is likely to be, including the expense to the city, somewhere around $311,000 a year. A good thing to understand about this is that, unlike most systems that capitalize their, or that include their capitalized costs in their operating fees, we've not done that. We're paying for the capital costs separate from the user fees. So from the user's viewpoint, it doesn't really matter what this system costs because it's not going to get reflected in their monthly bill. The important thing in their monthly bill is how much water they use, because how much water they use is going to determine how much sewage they create. And if the city is charging us a penny per gallon for that, for sewage treatment, we're passing that penny per gallon on to the customer. If the customer wants to reduce their bill, they just use less water. So the billing structure we anticipate, which has not been adopted yet by the board, is going to be a billing structure that heavily encourages conservation, more so than most sewer rates do. The other thing that protects us from is one of the big variables right now is how many people are going to be connected. Nobody can say with any certainty what that number is going to be. But it doesn't matter too much if most of our cost and most of the person connected is related to that penny per gallon. That penny per gallon is going to get paid for as we bill customers. If we don't have as many customers as we'd like, then we're not going to pay the city as much as we have anticipated. But if we have more than we had, then we'll pay the city more. But in any case, we'll be collecting at least that portion, the penny per gallon, from whoever is connected to the system.
So then who's going to be paying for all the other costs that aren't being passed on to the customers?
The operating costs are being passed on to the customers. If you're talking about the cap-on costs, then that's, as I've shown, that's being paid for.
Well, there's more to the operating cost than just a penny, right? So to the extent that there is annual operating and maintenance costs, there's billing and administration, there's unexpected repairs, there's water issues, there's going to be costs.
Right.
So to the extent, if we're not, I think you just said we're not actually, are we passing those all on to the customers? And if not, then who pays for it?
So, yeah, let me explain that better. Probably glossed over. The simple way, and I think an accurate way of looking at it, is there are two types of costs associated with operating this. One is all those things you just mentioned, the total 120,000 change. Those are the actual costs of operating the facility. The second big lump, and it's even bigger, is the charge that the city of Sequim has to treat that sewage. So those costs are going to be handled, I'm sure, separately. The cost of operating the system, 120, I'm sure will be essentially the base rate that people will get charged.
Okay, so what if that base rate, what if those costs aren't 120 but turn out to be 300 or 400?
Well, if they do, I'd want to know why, because it doesn't look like they will. So if they do, then the base rate would obviously be higher. But I mean, this is right now, this is our best estimate of what they are. So that base rate, you would pay, a customer would pay regardless of how much water they use. The rest of the bill, which is the larger portion of the bill, will be paid for through that penny per gallon charge. It will be dependent on how much water they do use.
So the less customers, the higher the base rate will be.
Right.
If we're going to collect back all of the operating and maintenance costs.
Right.
If it is at 120,000, if it turns out to be 300,000, and if the number of customers are not going to be as high, then that base rate is going to be very, very high.
Exactly, and if it's higher than we thought, then the base rate will be lower than we've anticipated. Right now, what this consultant anticipates is that we'll end up with the customers will end up with an average sewer bill of approximately $70. Of that, approximately 26 of it will be base rate, and the rest will be based on their gallon usage.
And so is this financial consultant, was that Gray and Osborne?
No, it was FCO Group, which is a firm that does rate analyses and studies statewide for jurisdictions. They've done.
Was Gray and Osborne involved at all? I think they did some of this. I saw their names.
Sure.
This was a double check for that analysis that's why we wanted to have a separate entity do it.
So Gray and Osborne was involved as well.
Sure, they work together because...
And so to the extent, though, that these assumptions are wrong, it will be passed on to the customers.
Depends on whether they're wrong in their favor or wrong, I mean...
Right, but the point is it's not the consultants who are going to be paying for being wrong, it's going to be the customers who are going to be paying for these analyses, perhaps not, if they turn out to be not as they assume.
Yeah, it's possible that the assumptions will change, and one of the things that I think we will need to do in the not too distant future is go through this financial analysis again once we've got actual customers that have signed up, begin the process of seeing what, if any, adjustments need to be made in this to accommodate that.
To accommodate that, but then to the extent that the customers aren't going to be paying for the costs of the sewer, the ongoing cost of the sewer, then who is going to be paying for the ongoing cost of the sewer? I'm assuming then that it will be the taxpayers. It will have to come from somewhere. This is a general fund funded project. So to the extent that customers aren't going to be paying for ongoing maintenance, if these assumptions are wrong, then these costs will be paid for by taxpayers.
As we've shown.
This isn't a general fund funded project in any way, shape, or form.
As we've shown, the customers are paying for the ongoing costs.
If the assumptions are right.
Right. The other thing I have to say is that we have not adopted the rate ordinance yet for this. wait until we've got better data to bring that ordinance forward. But fairly soon, the board will get the opportunity to consider, okay, what rates do we want to establish, what rate policies do we want to establish, along with all the other issues of what are the utility standards for operating this utility, what can you put in the sewer, what can't you put in the sewer, and so on.
So now, Jim, you mentioned this isn't a general fund
No.
project. I mean, the loan, the $10 million loan certainly is a general fund guaranteed debt.
It's an opportunity fund guaranteed debt that would be backed up by the general fund if the opportunity fund goes
Okay,
away.
it's a general fund obligated debt. That's very clear in the interlocal agreement between PUD and the county. This is a general fund obligated debt. Now, as far as where do the ongoing expenses come from?
By the way, that agreement was in order to get PUD to take the loan. They refused to do it. That agreement then is now null and void. We're going to have to come up with a whole new agreement with the PUD in terms of we're hoping to get them to do the...
I don't think that the agreement that guarantees that the county assumed this loan, how is that void to be...
That part isn't, but the part of where we're guaranteeing to the PUD, we're guaranteeing to the state, we will be paying this. And Stan and Bob will be showing that at the next exhibit of how we would make recommendations to the commissioners of 4 different options to pay for it. But, you know, I think the big issue, and most of the critics, in my judgment, that I've seen, letters to the editor and a few letters that we've received, and they keep commenting about Belfair building this big sewage treatment plant and how they're going bankrupt and they can't make it, and they didn't get as many people as they thought, and they talk about how the PUD declined to get involved because they were worried that it couldn't be afforded because there wouldn't be enough people involved, and all of those things were based on the original scope of the project, which was a 24/7 sewage treatment plant, which is not occurring anymore. That is a very expensive proposition, well over $1 million a year to run a plant like that. It has lots of working parts that can go wrong. I mean, it takes a lot of people to make that something like that pencil. What we did instead, when we took it over after the PUD declined to get involved and started working with the consultants in the city of Sequim, was to come up with a much less expensive, both to build and really less expensive to operate, transfer project. We're just transferring the sewage from Carlsberg, where it will be collected by gravity, pumped across to the city of Sequim, where they will, with their 24/7 sewage treatment plant. So we're charged for that portion, which would have been millions of plus a year to run our own sewage treatment plant, is now estimated at only $300,000 a year, complete total cost to run. So way less expensive, way less risk. And as Bob mentioned, I would guess damn near close to 100%, way in the upper 90% of in every sewage, sewer or water public project I've ever seen, you had to have a component in it for paying off the debt out of the collection. That was the other thing the PUD anticipated, and they were going to do an LUD, and we didn't do it that way. The commissioners decided to fund it out of the Opportunity Fund money. We'll show why later, why we'll have plenty of money to fund the operation, the building, not the operation, the construction. So that cost, which was in the Belfair project, as well as the 24/7 sewage treatment plant, we don't have in operation. So this is a very, very inexpensive operation for any kind of utility. It's pretty amazing. Way less risk to the county because of the way it has evolved. A lot of things were said back in the beginning in the 90s, 2000, and right up till 2010. And it just, as it evolved and as it designed and as it was built, those things are no longer appropriate because it's a very different project.
And I would just add, I spent a lot of time going over what we're doing and comparing it with the Belfair project with my counterpart in Mason County. And this is completely unlike, the structure of how we're setting this up is completely unlike what was done in Belfair. So that's operating costs. The final and I had, and this is more in Stan's bailiwick than mine, and a lot of the ideas reflected here are Stan, to the extent that credit is due, Stan gets a lot of it, and to the extent blame is due, we'll share it. But the way I see it, there are, you know...
Did you want to hand that out?
That would be good, wouldn't it? This is just kind of a sketch that I've done, just for purposes of illustration. Pardon me? Yeah, it's only on the ones that are stated. So this chart, first of all, say a couple of things. The agreement that we have, the loan agreement, requires repayment of the loan by 2048. I hope to be around to see the final payment, but it's probably unlikely. Most of you will be. If we were to, well, and secondly, the contract requires us to make an annual interest and principal payment. It doesn't say how much the principal has to be. It doesn't say equal annual interest and principal payments. It just says you have to make an annual principal and interest payment. So, but if we were to say, okay, let's schedule equal annual interest and principal payments from now until 2048. What would, just like you would a mortgage for a house, what would it take, what would that annual payment have to be in order to fully pay off the loan? That amount is shown over to the right as $316,000 a year approximately would do that. So we need to find $316,000 a year from Opportunity Fund or other sources. The state doesn't care where we get it. We have told the state that our intention is to get it from Opportunity Fund proceeds. So anyway, that's what it would cost to pay it off in annual fixed payments. Secondly, the Opportunity Fund, if that's our intent to use the Opportunity Fund, appears to be, is currently scheduled to sunset in 2032, I believe. So the second question or the second option might be, what if we just paid it off in equal annual payments during the currently anticipated life of the Opportunity Fund to 2032? If we did that, the annual payments would be $602,000 a year.
And by the way, that was what I have been estimating for the last 4 years, planning and projecting and telling everybody was my recommendation to do, was to have it done when the Opportunity Fund was over the $600,000 a year.
But there's the concern that the Opportunity Fund might be unfunded by the state legislature.
There it is. That's where Stan's ideas come in, start to come in.
And I'll address that here and invite Stan to step in whenever he thinks I've stepped on it. So yeah, if you pay it off during the current anticipated life of the Opportunity Fund, 2032, $602,000 a year. What if the Opportunity Fund goes away? What if the state legislature, in their unending quest for additional funds for various things, decides to terminate this? I think there's 26 counties?
29 counties that have fully bonded the Opportunity Fund all the way out.
So that, they'd have a concern on their hand, because a lot of people have done what we have done. And we've said that the Opportunity Fund is the way we're going to collect revenue to pay off either a bond issue or a loan from the state or something like that. So if the state, knowing that that's the source of revenue to pay off loans and bonds, takes it away from us, there's going to be a fairly large cry of anguish from 29 jurisdictions, 29 counties. But they could do it. I mean, they certainly have the authority, power, and they've discussed it in the past, and so far have not done it. But what if they do? There are a couple of options here that I will describe, which I think Stan has described as being arbitrage heavy and arbitrage light. Arbitrage is an effort to take advantage of the fact that we only have to pay 0.25% on this loan. We can probably invest money from the Opportunity Fund in long-term investments that earn quite a bit more than 0.25%. So the thought here is that, okay, then, combined with the fact that all we have to do is make an annual interest and principal payment, unspecified how much interest, or unspecified how much principal. Suppose we pay off the interest and a nominal amount of the principal annually. The interest annually on $10 million at 0.25% is $25,000, not very much. So suppose we give them $30,000 a year. We could then take more than that out of the Opportunity Fund, set it aside in an investment account that earns a lot more than 0.25%, let it grow to a point where it would reach an amount that would further grow without any further contributions to it to the end of the loan, which is 2048. So that's what this top line of this chart shows. You could sink $632,000 a year into an investment account that earns, my assumption was 2.5%. There are people around the table that know more about what the reality is there than I do. But if you could get 2.5%, you're investing $632 a year. By the year 2024, I think by 8 years, you will have invested enough to accumulate a balance of a little over $5 million. You would then be able to stop putting any further money into that account, other than paying the $25,000 a year for interest. You wouldn't be paying anything further to the trust fund, and you just let this $5 million ride to the end of the life of the loan, at which point it would have accumulated to $10 million and pay off the loan that way in a final balloon payment at the end of the loan period. Which, in reviewing that concept with the prosecutor's office, seems to be allowable under the contract. Now, I have to tell you, that's not what the Public Works Board expects us to do. It's not what is commonly done. Commonly, these loans have been paid off in fixed annual payments, just like you would in a mortgage. In other words, just like the $316,000 that I previously mentioned. But because there may be uncertainty about the life of the funding source that we have for that, for those loan payments, that is the Opportunity Fund. It seems to me a kind of additional option could exist. There's actually a lot of variations on this thing, but you could start paying the $316,000 a year immediately. That's pretty much what the Public Works Board expects us to do. But then you could appropriate out of the Opportunity Fund, say $630,000 a year, and use the difference between the $316 and the $632 to set up an investment account that is in has rates of return that are greater than 0.25%. And the reason for considering doing that is that if, in fact, the legislature were to terminate the Opportunity Fund at some point, you would have built up, depending on how long it is from now until when they terminate it, you'll have built up an investment account that can buffer the impact of that loss of that Opportunity Fund for loan repayments. And so what I've shown in the second two lines here is, suppose we did that. Suppose we pulled $632,000 out of the Opportunity Fund, paid $316,000 a year to the Public Works Board, and banked the rest in long-term investments. And then 3 years down the road, say, the legislature pulls the plug on the Opportunity Fund, we would have accumulated at that point a little less than $2 million in this investment account. That $2 million, if you write it out to the end of 2008, accumulates to roughly $4 million. So we've still got $600,000 to repay. But instead of having to do that in amounts of $316,000 a year, we could drop that to $200,000 a year and make up the difference. So it has the setting aside some money or arbitraging some money gives us some buffer for the what if the Opportunity Fund goes away. You could either use that buffer to supplement or to pay part of the $316,000, or you could just let it ride in long-term investments, make a balloon payment at the end. I think if the legislature would take away the Opportunity Fund, there would exist a pretty good argument that these kinds of things, which don't seem to be prohibited by the basic language of the contract, would be attractive to most people who have assumed they're going to pay off long-term debt with the Opportunity Fund. So I think the Public Works Board would be pretty compelled to accept this sort of a thing. So in the event that the Opportunity Fund were to terminate early, say 3 years from now, our annual payments would drop to $200,000, and we'd be able to supplement that at the end with a $4 million balloon payment to get to the debt retirement. So those are some of the options to consider, at least, and they arise because we have an opportunity to invest money at a higher rate of interest or a higher rate of return than we have to pay the Public Works Board in interest.
And just as an additional point of interest, when Stan first brought me this idea, it was more than a year ago when you first suggested this to me as an idea to bring to the commissioners, I was concerned about an issue that I had some years ago when I was at the school district, and we had a bond, a similar situation, but different in one critical point that I'll get to, that we were to build an elementary school or the school district that was costing a very, very small amount of money and to pay off this interest-free bond because it was voted debt. The project didn't start for a couple of years, and this money just accumulated, sitting with the treasurer here. We're making a whole bunch of money. The IRS came and knocked on our door and said, this is an illegal interest arbitrage because of it being public debt. And so I was concerned this might be the same situation. Well, this is public debt, and the IRS wanted the difference in the money paid to them. But it turned out the unique circumstance that differs between what that was and what this was, and Stan and I both looked into this issue, was the other one was voted debt that was municipal debt that was tax-free to the IRS. The school district's bond was voted tax-free municipal bond. This is not voted debt, is not tax-free, is not interest-free. And that was the distinction. The IRS was determining, hey, we give a big advantage to investors to be able to buy into those public bonds and not earn or not have to pay any income tax on the income that they receive. You can't take advantage of that public entity, school district, and do this arbitrage. So This one is different, and that was another question we asked the prosecutor to make sure that we were thinking clearly. So that is a distinction that I was worried about a year plus ago when Stanford brought me this idea.
One thing I would point out, when we're talking about the investment we would put this money in, I'm looking at something like a zero coupon 30-year treasury, which is yielding 2.7 something now, which is extraordinarily low based on its historical average. Its historical average is more than 7%. Of course, we're in a very low interest rate environment. Who knows how long it'll be? But this assumes that the 30-year treasury does not go to zero. If the 30-year treasury goes up in the meantime, it looks better because we can buy something that yields 4% or 5% rather than 2.73. And if we are sitting on treasuries, let's say 3 years out, we're buying a piece of treasuries each year, and the interest rate goes up, it is true that the market value of the treasuries we hold will go down, but that's immaterial because we have no intent to sell them. We intend to hold them to maturity. And so if indeed there is a paper capital loss, it is of no matter to us at all. A basic financial principle is you want to match the maturity of your assets to the maturity of your obligations. And having done that, we've locked in the difference, and at least I'm happy with it.
Hence the classic description of an arbitrage.
Exactly, exactly. You have decided, okay, I will lock in this X million dollars of advantage, and I'm done with it. I'm not going to worry if my timing I would have locked in a better advantage or a lesser advantage. I'm happy with the one I've got. In all of this, because we're talking about doing this, buying treasuries a piece at a time, a yearly increment as it were, it gives the board and everyone else opportunity to rethink this on a yearly basis or even a monthly basis, however you look at it. What are the chances the legislature in the state of Washington is going to do this with the Opportunity Fund or that with the Opportunity Fund? What are interest rates doing? So this is not something you commit to now and you're stuck with it for the next 40 years. This is something that works in many ways in small pieces. So there's less risk in that respect because you haven't made a 40-year commitment based upon one decision now. You've made a commitment that comes in small pieces and you can decide a variety of different ways. My personal feeling for this is, and we talked about arbitrage heavy and arbitrage light, which would, arbitrage heavy would be pay very little principal to the Public Works Trust Board on until the very end when it's all paid. Or the second alternative is paying a straight line amount of principal each year and having a smaller amount of treasuries you buy. There are other opportunities. You might say, well, let's worry about the state killing the Opportunity Fund funding, and so for the first few years we're going to tell the board, here's what we're worried about, here's why we're not paying you a whole lot. But once we've got this funded out 3 or 4 or 5 years, then we'll switch back to paying you your straight line stuff, and they may very well be okay with that. So we're not saying you get nothing until the year 2048. We're saying we're worried about our funding source. We're squeezing you in the first 2 or 3 or 4 years, but then we're going back to a normal payment. And that may, it's just a guess, it may make them happier with the issue. They will understand why we are doing it, and they will potentially be less unhappy with us. It's a question I cannot possibly answer here, but there are a variety of ways of slicing this. There are many different ways to decide how much money you put where. It's the basic concept we're looking at, is taking advantage of the very low interest rate on this loan. And for example, the numbers we're talking about, if we were to pay it off at face value of cash, we're talking in round numbers $10 million in cash to pay the loan off. $10 million loan, $10 million cash. If you go arbitrage light, we're talking about paying $8 million in cash over the life of the loan. If you're talking arbitrage heavy, you're talking paying $4 or $5 million. So it's a significant amount of money because over long terms, relatively small differences in interest rates generate enormous differences at the end. So it's a very complex question. it's a concept sort of question. Many different variables on how you can decide what piece to go where. That's how I look at it, as a concept, because part of the reason why the state, I think, gives us these very long-term, low-interest rate loans is so that they can, in essence, pay a big chunk of the cost of the sewer program and pretend to the whole world that it's not. Oh yeah, we're paying, given 10 million, we're getting 10 million back, it's a push. It isn't. They're paying half of the cost of this, no matter how you slice it, because money is worth a whole lot less in 2048 than it is now.
The other point that the contract doesn't require us to start those full payments until 5 years.
Actually, it does.
Oh, it does now?
That 5-year deferral only applies if we're paying the loan out of the proceeds of the project.
Oh, okay, so we do have to start next year.
We need to start right now. I mean,
with the interest portion?
With whatever we decide to pay.
Oh,
we have to continue, we have to start at least making interest payments.
Right.
We'll need to
have to pay interest.
We'll need to make a payment by June 1st,
I believe it's June 1st.
Okay.
I'll just add a couple of things briefly. One is that the 0.25% interest is dependent upon our getting this project built by April 1st of 2017. Basically, what the trust fund has done is they've said, this is $10 million at 1/2 of 1%, but if you can finish it in 4 years, which is April 1st of 2017, then they'll drop the interest rate down to 0.25%. So there's that caveat. The arbitrage principle still works at 0.5%, it's just not as good as it is at 0.25%. Secondly, I think the takeaway from all of this, fundamentally, Stan is absolutely right. There are a lot of ways to look at this and a lot of ways to set it up, but if we can afford to reserve a amount out of the opportunity fund that we're currently getting that exceeds what our annual payments would be, whatever we decide they need to be, that will have the effect of buffering any future loss of that revenue source. That is, loss of the opportunity fund. So it's really prudent, if you can afford to do it, to reserve for debt service on this loan more than what you have to pay right now. However you set that up in whatever range of options you decide, it's sensible to bank more than what you need.
But ultimately, what it comes down to, though, is that it's up to the commissioners to commit to doing that.
Right.
And that commitment can change at any time.
Absolutely.
I think that is what happened last year. There was a commitment from a previous board to reserve certain funds for the Carlsbad Sewer project, but then those reserves there was a rethinking last year to spend those reserves. And so my point is here, it sounds like a great idea, but it completely depends on the intent of whatever board is in existence in any given year and what their priorities are. If they decide that this year we don't want to put money into this investment, then it won't happen. I mean, it's going to be, or for that matter, if the board at the time decides to cash out the investments. Ultimately, it will be up to the board at any given time to decide the priorities for the opportunity funds and whether they want to spend whatever money there is or whether they are going to stick with the commitment that perhaps this board is willing to make. And that is completely outside of any of our control.
Yeah, the board can do whatever they want.
I would jump in and ask 2 questions here, Bob, if we got a second before I forget about them. Number one is people, users on this program, there's going to be a period in which they get a bargain hookup, and then after that they're going to be paying a larger amount of hookup charge. Is that hookup charge in excess of our marginal cost to hook them up? If it is, there's a small capital recovery there. Where does that capital recovery, where is it planned for that to go? Is that going to go back into the sewer fund itself to cover any contingency there, or will that go back to the opportunity fund to reimburse some of the capital that the opportunity fund has put in?
No, the concept with connection charges, I mean, you're right, we're trying to encourage a higher customer connection rate by having an initial buy-in period that's pretty favorable. Pretty much, a lot of people have called me and said that this is great and they're going to connect because it's never going to be cheaper. But the purpose of the connection charges is to build a capital repair and replacement account that is used to do two things primarily. One, we anticipate there will be a need for some repairs and some replacement within the Carlsberg system itself. Not probably a lot, because it's a simple system, gravity sewer lines and a pump station. But there'll be some probably, and it's prudent to have a reserve for that. Secondly, and by far more importantly in terms of the long-range picture here, is that we have agreed to participate with the city of Sequim in the cost of any future expansions of the portion of the Sequim sewer system that we are utilizing in proportion to the amount of utilization we're making of that. In other words, if they decide to replace a sewer line section that is currently carrying, say, 75% of their flow and 25% of the Carlsberg flow, we would participate in that to the extent of 25%. And so the bottom line on that, though, is that our initial portion of the whole system that we're using, the flow that comes into the sewage treatment plant in Sequim, is going to start at around 3% or 4% of the total flow that they're handling, and ultimately build, we hope, to 6, 7, maybe 8%. So our percentage of their future capital costs is generally fairly low, except in those lines that we are primarily using. The way that works is that when the sewage from Sequim drops into the sewage from Carlsberg drops into the Sequim sewer system at Grant Road, pretty much at our county shop, we will be using, for a short section, we'll be using almost 100% of the capacity of that sewer line. As we get closer and closer to the treatment plant, we use less and less capacity, to where by the time it gets to the sewage treatment plant, we're only using about 3% of the capacity of those lines. And that applies also to capital improvements in the treatment system itself. If we're using 3% and they're going to invest in a capital improvement, we'll end up sharing in the cost of that to the extent that we're using it, that is 3%. The biggest one I see coming down the line is that 5, 6, 7 years from now, they're going to expand their biosolids handling capability. That's a multi-million-dollar project. We'll be paying a percentage of that. And so that's what this reserve is for, is to pay those anticipated capital improvement shares of whatever the city of Sequim does. And the plan that's in here, the financial plan, estimates all of that based on what the city's capital improvement program looked like at the time they did that plan. So there's...
And that's the account Bob was talking, that most of whatever is left of this reserve, the construction reserve that's not used, one of the things that could be done would be to populate to further load this future capital replacement
reserve
account.
fund, basically.
Yeah, capital reserve fund, yeah.
That's question one. Second question is, how are we going to be calculating flows for individual participants if they're on wells or otherwise their water in is unknown? How do we know how much to charge them?
The recommendation here, again, we haven't adopted a sewer ordinance yet, is that we put customers who are not on metered water on a fixed rate. It's a little higher than the rate that they would see on the average if they were on metered water.
Okay.
The second aspect of that, of course, is that the customers that are receiving their own, and we think there's going to be maybe 20% of them are going to be in that category. They'll be paying a fixed rate. They won't have the same opportunity the others do to conserve water and reduce their bill unless they're willing to put in a meter. So it would be prudent for the county or for the PUD to encourage a metered water on a voluntary basis
Or I think
Well, Bob, I sure hope you're all right on this, on behalf of the
I'm
taxpayers.
absolutely certain that I won't be. You know, I think there are going to be plenty of opportunities along the line to make adjustments as we learn new things.
So once the commissioners make their decision on how they want to pay, does the Public Works Board, do they just accept that, or do they have the opportunity to say we don't like that plan, or?
Well, as I said, it kind of depends on what we decide to do, but their expectation is that the recipients of these loans, and historically it's been the case, the recipients of these loans pay the loan off in fixed annual payments, just like a mortgage.
That's the $316,000 a year you're talking about.
Right. Anything that varies from that, you know, it's going to be prudent for us if we're on a course that does something different to sit down with the Public Works Trust Fund Board and at least explain to them, as Dan has suggested, why we're doing what we're doing. We think we have legal authority to do what we're doing, and we think the contract does allow it. But I'm also aware, bureaucrats being bureaucrats, if you give them something they wouldn't expect, you're probably going to get a little pushback. So, you know, I would advise to, you know, figure out how you want to do this, and then sit down with the Public Works Trust Fund Board staff and kind of go through it and explain it and why we're doing it, and you know how it's going to result in the loan ultimately being paid off. And try to get there, if not total acquiescence, at least understanding of what we're doing.
Of course, the easy way to do it is to pay as agreed, $316,000, and take Bob's arbitrage, or Bob and Stan's arbitrage-like suggestion, take another $300,000, the original $600 that we've been talking about all along, and put that $300 in the 20-year or 30-year or 40-year treasury to build up the cushion in case it goes away. Then they're not involved. They're getting exactly what they thought they were going to get. Life is good. The only thing we're doing is that we're taking that $1 million a year that we get into the Opportunity Fund for as long as it keeps coming in, and we're setting aside $600,000 of it for this project. And therefore, there's only $400,000 available for other projects in the future each year. That'd be the easier way to do it. You don't even have to ask the Trust Fund Board that. You pay them what they're asking for.
actually, it wouldn't do that for the entire year. The last couple of years of the life of the Opportunity Fund, you would be fully funded, so you'd be okay. But most of the life of the Opportunity Fund.
Yeah. Because if you did that, we wouldn't have to do it forever.
2029, you can stop the payments, basically.
There you go.
And again, that depends on every single future board between now and then agreeing to the scheme.
Yep. It depends on a lot of things that we cannot see right here sitting.
Pretty much everything we do on everything we do it on depends on future boards, you know, either agreeing or not agreeing. We're stuck with that.
Well, I've had a lot of concern about the sewer, but it seems like it's all water, or soon to be sewage, under the bridge. So I think it sounds like it's a done deal at this point. And we've taken out $1.5 million of this loan. So I'm not sure that anything I say at this point, or any of us say at this point, will make one bit of difference in how, whether it is going forward. So I wish the board the best of luck. Anybody else on this issue, which is the last issue on the agenda? I think our next regularly scheduled meeting is for June 9.
I actually did have a question, if I could. The one thing that seems to me is absolutely smack dab in the middle of the Finance Committee and the Treasurer's responsibility and authority, and what I think I understand this question, I'd like to ask it of the Finance Committee and the Treasurer's office, and that is the $1.6 million that we currently have in that account that we need for cash flow, is that available cash or liquid, or is it in some long-term investment?
Which
The $1.6 million that's in the Carlsberg sewer fund already cash, and we're getting another $900,000. I'm not worried about it, because the one worry that I had, and I couldn't tell from the documents, if there's any way that $1.6 million that's already in the Carlsberg sewer fund has been put in some long-term investment, 2
I
years.
seriously doubt it.
Well, I think that's the answer, but that really is the question for you. Can we afford to do what we're planning to
Well, to
do?
the extent that it would be invested, which I seriously doubt, and the treasurer's office could buy the investment for the treasurer's cash. So I don't think that is an issue at all in today's discussion.
Great.
But the whole idea of doing an investment like this will actually, we'll need to sit down as a finance committee and discuss it, because our current finance policy does not allow for any investments that exceed 2 years. So it is something that we need to discuss and need to decide. So that's another issue that we need to address. I mean, this was discussed as a possibility, but thank you for bringing it up, because it is something actually that will have to come back to the finance committee before we proceed with such a plan.
Absolutely.
And I do know that in Mason County, they considered something like this as well. So that is the thought of the, I will be reaching out to the Mason County treasurer and see where that issue went. But that is definitely an issue that has to go through the finance committee, that has to be approved by the finance committee, then it has to be approved by me. Because as the treasurer, I have final authority over all investments.
Obviously, though, with the construction project ongoing, the necessity is that the Carlsberg sewer fund be
Yes,
totally liquid.
and it is. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be. Any other questions?
So when's the first payment due?
I think we have a payment due June 1st.
Interest only on the
Yeah, it's the interest only.
So there's plenty of time for the finance committee to begin to review their advice and to advise the board on a long-term payment plan. In fact, that time frame could be well into next year before a final decision needs to be made.
Yeah, I would suggest, that it's just, it's not my responsibility, but if you can afford to do it, I would reserve as much as $600,000 or $630,000 out of the opportunity fund this year, if you can afford to do that.
I would jump in and make one comment. The payment due this June 1st will consist of accrued interest plus whatever principal, however we define it. It does not specify the interest only for the first any number of years. Where we stand, it says, payment shall consist of principal and accrued interest. Going back to the issue of how much principal is done.
Yeah, the principal amount will be pretty small, because we won't have,
Well, both will be small.
both will be fairly small, yeah. The principal would be based on how much of the loan we've utilized up to that point, for as long as we've utilized it. So it's going to be far less than the 10 million, and it's going to be for far less of a period than 1 full year. So it's not going to be a huge payment, but we need to make a payment.
That would require, in my humble opinion, depending on, again, how much, a potential budget emergency hearing, if we try to do it before next year's budget. I was planning on building that $600,000 into next year's budget, but didn't anticipate it in this year's budget. The reserves are there, we could do it, but that one would require, under our policies, a budget emergency hearing, I believe.
I'm not sure that the Opportunity Fund budget for 2016 includes provision for this payment on June.
It does not, that's what I'm saying, I was planning it for next year, but I didn't build it into this year.
I understand. Okay.
That's why I'm saying that one would take a budget hearing, a budget emergency hearing.
With regards to investments and arbitrage, there's time to work through that and let the finance committee do their job to advise the board.
I will put that on the future agenda item for the Finance Committee, and I will definitely start taking a look at that, and we'll be adding that to the agenda and discussing it.
One point I will need to discuss with the auditor when we get audited is how we will treat, in an accounting sense, if we do go ahead and purchase long-term treasuries, if the decision is made and all the I's and T's get done, there will be some issue with respect to capital gain or loss on that investment. And I will have to talk to the state auditor and find out what the state expects me to do in terms of disclosing that. And I don't know, I don't think it'll be a big issue, but there has the potential, if we've got some years down the road, $3 million in treasuries sitting somewhere, and interest rates go up, and there's a $300,000, $500,000 capital loss on paper, it may or may not look ugly. So we need to understand that that risk exists in all of this, to be reporting paper losses and how we go about doing that, just so the board understands that there's a potential that something ugly looking could come out, even if it's not ugly in reality.
I appreciate that, and I think that's a lot of what the conversation at the Finance Committee is going to have to. We probably need to know that answer at some point, whether in June or September. That's a key point, because your balance sheet could look bad. There's no doubt that there's a potential for interest rates to skyrocket at some point, and treasuries to drop like a rock. And that could look very ugly. So, good point. I think we need more information. We need to know how that would look, and how that would impact the county's fiscal position, and how that would look on, and that's going to fall right back, into your area of authority. So, good point, Stan.
Well, so the next regular scheduled meeting is set for June 9th. If anybody else, and according, we will also be setting a meeting for the purposes of the budget process in early July. Do we want to set that meeting now for early July, or do we want to set that when we meet in June?
I think we have it on the budget calendar tentatively set
was gonna
for
talk
the
to
third
her
week of
before
July,
I-
I think, but.
All right, well, I'll talk to Ben, and
Sounds
then
good.
I'll send out that date, and,
Okay.
so that we all have it. But I do think that with the issues going on, we should also meet in June 9th. So with that, I move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, adjourn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Proposed projects. And the reason I went through this is because as to the proposed Opportunity Fund grant and the proposed Carlsberg Sewer project, the way I read these provisions is that the Finance Committee authority is limited to simply offering advice. And so I don't anticipate running to some sort of a vote that either that this project should go forward or not. I think whatever is set here today should be considered to be advice to the Board of County Commissioners, and as such, advice can be taken or ignored. Now, what I attached to this sheet, this is simply my advice, Treasurer's advice to the Board of Clallam County Commissioners regarding the Finance Committee authority. So having said that, and I think our authority here and our board here is limited to offering advice, so my advice about these projects is, as we discussed them, is that from my perspective, there are two aspects to the commissioners making a decision. Ultimately, what it comes down to is it's up to the commissioners to decide whether to move these projects forward and how to move these projects forward. And anything we say here is advice. So having said that, my advice is, from my perspective, that I see two aspects to the commissioner's funding decision-making process. First question would be, can the commissioners make these projects or fund these projects? and whether the commissioners should fund these projects. And those are the two questions I think the commissioners should consider asking as they make these decisions. And from my perspective, whether the county commissioners should fund certain projects is entirely within their discretion-making decision, to be exercised only when the commissioners have determined that they can fund such projects. And whether the commissioners can fund either of these projects raises issues of responsibility and accountability. And the next quote comes from a memorandum that is on the intranet, maintained by the budget director, and it says, the primary response to policy and advisement. The Clallam County Finance Committee has been in existence for over 50 years. A formal investment policy was adopted by the Finance Committee in 1985, and then it says the county policy 515 in effect. And county policy 500, general finance policies, section 5.12, county's budget procedures. The county's budget procedures shall comply with RCW chapter 3640. Procedures outlined in county commission resolutions are followed in establishing the budgetary data reflected in the financial statements. Specifics of the county's budget procedures are listed below. The one that mentions the Finance Committee. In early July, the Finance Committee meets and reviews revenues for the first half of the year, trends and preliminary estimates for the coming budget year. The Board of Commissioners may by a resolution approve budget principles that modify these financial policies for the coming year only. And then in section 6.1, annual revenues of County Policy 500. Annual revenues are conservatively estimated as a basis for preparation of annual budgets and county service programs. Major revenues will be estimated by the county treasurer and reviewed by the county's finance committee prior to adoption of the annual budget. All revenue forecasts will be performed utilizing accepted analytical techniques. And then again, there's a section entitled Finance Committee in County Policy 500, that's subsection 8.2. The county will maintain a finance committee whose membership includes, at a minimum, the chair of the Board of Commissioners, the county auditor, and the county treasurer, who shall act as chair. The finance committee will meet at least quarterly and will discuss investments, anticipated and actual revenues, financial trends, and the state of the various county funds. The finance committee shall adopt and maintain a sound investment policy as required by the revised codes in Washington. The finance committee shall formulate plans to address revenue shortfalls, both short and long term. The finance committee will review the county's financial policies at least biannually and make recommendations for changes to the Board of Commissioners. The committee may, at its discretion, discuss other issues related to financial matters, increase its membership, and formulate financial policies for recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. So what we were asked to do early this year is to review and vet responsibility for monitoring of budgets to ensure compliance with county policies rests with the county official. Policy and rules of accountability require departments to monitor their budgets, revenues, and expenditures closely. Now, last year, I exercised my check and balance executive authority in a due diligence attempt to draw the Commissioner's attention to certain recommendations and actions by staff under the Commissioner's responsibility and accountability involving proposed expenditures for budgets, also under the County Commissioner's responsibility and accountability. And at this point today, the only thing I have to say to that is, to the extent that the Commissioners now share those concerns, I advise the Commissioners to resolve them, because ultimately only they can. And so what I have attached is, well, as we just discussed, the compilation of these Finance Committee authority provisions. And for the Commissioners, the document, Knowing the Territory, basic legal guidelines for Washington City, County, and Special Purpose Districts, which was prepared by the Municipal Research Services Corporation, and was just issued in August of 2015. And then the other handouts, which I won't go through, but my recommendation to the Commissioners, my advice to the Commissioners is to review all this at their leisure as they move forward And one of the documents is entitled Powers, Responsibilities, and Accountability, and it is a summary of where basically my concerns of last year is what led me to use my executive authority. This sort of sums it up. It's a very short compilation of everything that happened last year. And then the other document is a compilation of public process and notice requirements for budget actions, the way they are set out in state statute, RCW 36.40, and then the county policy provisions. And with that, that's all I have to say about the Finance Committee authority and my advice, and I would like to hand it over to anybody around the table if they have anything to add to this agenda item section.
No, you've done a very thorough job explaining that, and I think for the first time in the county's history, it's documented.
So before we begin, I was asked to have people around the table introduce themselves for the benefit of the people who may be watching this video. So my name is Selinda Barkhuis. I'm the county treasurer. I'm the chair of the Finance Committee.
Kay Stevens, senior accountant in the treasurer's office.
Mark Ozias, commissioner.
Bill Peach, commissioner.
Debbie Cook, budget director.
Jim Jones, county administrator.
Bob Martin, County Public Works.
Stan Creasy, auditor's chief accountant.
Shooter Riggs, county auditor.
Mike Chapman, chair of the board.
And before we move on, I also want to point out the voting members of the Finance Committee are me as the chair and the county treasurer, Shooter Riggs as the county auditor, and then Mike Chapman as the chair of the board of county commissioners. The three of us are the voting members of the Finance Committee, to the extent that comes out today. So the first item then will be the approval of the agenda. That would help if I pass it out. And also, while passing that out, I'll pass out the revenue month. Usually, it's available online, but we usually do pass it out at the Finance Committee. And the treasurer's CD ladder that's also passed out.
So, Madam Chair, I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second, any discussion? And a vote? Aye. Okay, the agenda is approved. So the first item then on the agenda, does everybody have agenda? Is the Finance Committee authority, and I will hand this out now. I have 3 copies that have additional information because it was quite extensive. It's available online. It is the Knowing the Territory, which is basically the guidelines for Washington City, County, and Special Purpose District officials, and the commissioners are going to get a copy of each of that. And the documents in red. I'm hoping I have enough copies of this one.
I can make some more if you want. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, okay. I have extra. Everybody have one then? I think everybody around the table has one then. And this is the first item, the Finance Committee authority. And the first page behind it is a compilation of all these sections in state statute and in county policy that talk about the Finance Committee. And the reason I did this because it's very consistent and it sets out our authority and limits of our authority, I suppose, as the Finance Committee. And that is how we're here today. We're here as the Finance Committee. We're not here as the individual treasurer, the individual auditor, or the board. We're here as the Finance Committee. And as a Finance Committee, What it says about that in the statute, and I'm going to read this, the county treasurer, the county auditor, the chair of the county legislative authority, ex officio, shall constitute the county finance committee. The county treasurer shall act as chair of the committee and the county auditor as secretary thereof. The committee shall keep a full and complete record of all its proceedings and appropriate books of record, and all such records and all correspondence relating to the committee shall be kept in the office of the county auditor and shall be open to public inspection. The committee shall approve county investment policy and the debt policy and shall make appropriate rules and regulations for the carrying out of the provisions of RCW 3648.010 through 3648.060, not inconsistent with law. And those sections, well, they have to do with designated depositories, which is not at all on the agenda today. And then in the finance policies, basically it repeats that. And it, for instance, on the County Policy 515, Investment Policy, Section 1.2, Finance Committee, this committee was formed for the purpose of monitoring investments made by the treasurer. The post of the county treasurer, county auditor, and the chair of the board of county commissioners is frequently attended by other interested parties, although I don't think in the 5 years I've been here we've had this many interested parties. It has the formal duties of adopting